So we're up to 2006. We're up to 11 years ago. And we're up to an era where most people watching this should be able to recall the Stanley Cup. Who won and how. And in 2004, it was Calgary, Southern Alberta, that was the victim. 2006, Northern Alberta is the victim. But let's not talk about that. Let's talk about something else. The Carolina Hurricanes win the Stanley Cup. Unexpected. They'd been the whale. The Hartford Whalers were a team that had a very vocal, dedicated fan base that wasn't big enough, and sadly the team played in a mall, so there really wasn't a chance to save the team. They ended up moving to Carolina. That look was because that pop's been sitting open for about 4 hours, and it's hot in here, so it's kind of, yeah. They moved to Carolina, and since they got to Carolina, there's been a lot of talk the whole way through of, oh, this team isn't going to last, it's not going to make it, it's not blah, 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 blah. And the funny thing to me is that people say, well, move them back to Hartford. There's a vocal minority that say that. You'd have the same problem. This was lightning in a bottle, and this was something nobody saw coming. In the first round against Montreal, they were screwed. Martin Gerber, and I liked Gerber. Don't get me wrong, I liked Martin Gerber a lot. I used to call him the Gerber baby, and I thought he was just great. I loved Martin Gerber. 3.53 goals against, 856 save percentage, 1-1 record. Most of that attributed to the first round. He played 6 games, he got 2 decisions. The rest of the playoffs, he came in if a game was a laugher to give his replacement some rest. His replacement was a rookie named Cam Ward, who won 15 games at a 2.14 goals against and a 920 save percentage, wins the Conn Smythe. Now, you compare his save percentage to some of the other goalies I've showed you, and it's lower. But Carolina wasn't a star-studded roster. Carolina was a good, deep team that got hot at the right time. They played in a weak division. They ended up with a lot of points coming out of that weak division, and Carolina was ahead of the rest of the league in speed. The name of the game coming out of the lockout was speed. So teams that were built for size, like Philadelphia, built to be a big, bruising team, they had a hard time competing because now the game was about speed. And Carolina was all about that and all about running 4 lines. You look at their regular season, Eric Stahl had a career year coming out of the lockout. 100 points. It left him with an expectation he could never reach again. He was a 100-point player, and everybody's like, all right, Eric Stahl is a superstar. He is fantastic, and he'll be a 50-goal scorer, and he wasn't that. In the playoffs, 25 games, he has 28 points. So he continued that hot streak into the playoffs. Number 1 scorer for the Stanley Cup champions. I've always wondered how much Eric Stahl thinks about this season. This was the perfect season. It was 11 years ago, and he's never really got close to it again in terms of his stats and a team he plays for. He's never really got close to it again. I only have Stahl here because, of course, this is before Jordan Stahl played there. And I didn't think anybody would think it was Jared Stahl that has scored 1,000 points. That's their brother. Focus. I want to mention this too. Every now and then, if the the webcam goes out of focus, it doesn't like all the white space. It sees all the white space and it goes, what? And it kind of loses focus. Justin Williams, 76 points. Had 18 in the playoffs, and this is where the mystique of Williams started. Williams' magic in the playoffs starts with this Stanley Cup. And then it moved with him to LA. Rod Brind'Amour, 18 points in the playoffs, 70 in the regular season. Rod Brind'Amour is one of those rare guys that when he hit his 30s got better. He was a damn good player younger too, but man, he was fantastic when he got older. He kept getting better, and right up until I think he's 35 or 36, there was still no sign of a decline, and when it happened, he just fell right off the cliff. But he put up so many points. Corey Stillman was one of my favorite players at this point. Corey Stillman was a guy that I never felt got the respect. he just never got the respect that I felt that he deserved. He put up a lot of points, and nobody ever talked about him. He had 76 points here, 26 in the playoffs, and really isn't talked about very much. And he wasn't then either. Stillman, he put up a lot of points, and I don't know, maybe it was because of his size or something. There was something else that people thought held him back. In my eyes, it didn't. I thought Corey Stillman was great. I love Corey Stillman, great player. Matt Cullen is here. So, here's Cullen winning a Stanley Cup. 18 points in 25 games. He's nowhere to be found in the regular season. Playoff time, Cullen steps it up. In fact, when I look at it, Matt Cullen had 49 points in the regular season, so he's just behind Whitney. But he had 18 points in the playoffs when the tough points are scored. Brett Hedican, of course, on this team as well. Other notables, Mike Commodore. When Commodore won this Stanley Cup, of course, he'd been with Calgary in 2004. It was such an emotional thing for him. And I was happy for him. This final was strange. So they get through Montreal in the first round. I'm giddy. Watching them beat Montreal in the first round was a fantastic feeling. Because these were the Hurricanes. Okay, like I said, when they were in Hartford, they were a laughingstock. And this was revenge for all the Whalers' losses they suffered in the 80s to Montreal. They beat New Jersey in the second round. I'm over the moon. I'm like, oh, thank God I don't have to watch New Jersey again in the finals. And I know I've got Jersey Devil fans who watch this, and I'm sorry. But that was honestly my opinion at the time. Semifinals, they beat Buffalo in 7. And that was deadly because both of them are relatively small market teams with lower payrolls at the time. And it was kind of fantastic to see the playoffs work out this way. Coming out of the lockout, it was important that we had a Stanley Cup champion we didn't expect. And that we had teams competing for this championship that nobody would have picked going into the season. Carolina and Buffalo were two of those teams. Edmonton absolutely was one of those teams. Game 7 between Edmonton and Carolina may be talked about a lot. For me, the Stanley Cup was lost when Dwayne Rollison went down for the Oilers. I give Carolina full marks for this Stanley Cup, but I think it would have gone to Edmonton if Rollison had been healthy. Rollison was on a run, and then they had to go to UC Markkanen. And I was a Markkanen fan, but he wasn't Rollison. And Cam Ward was in the zone. Absolutely. This team comes out of nowhere, guys like Frank Caberly. There's only one Hall of Famer on this roster, and that's Mark Recchi. And he was a rental, came in at the deadline. He wasn't with Carolina the whole year. Those 64 points, most of them are scored elsewhere. He comes in at the deadline, scores 16 points in the playoffs, they win a Stanley Cup. Recchi is a Hall of Famer in part because he's able to do that. He's able to win Stanley Cups with multiple teams. And he plays an active role on any Cup champion. You'll see that in 2011. There's 3 guys I picked off the roster that I said, all right, maybe they should have been in the Hall of Fame already. Or at least they have to get in the conversation. Rod Brind'Amour, Ray Whitney, and Doug Weight. It almost feels to me like maybe there should be another wing of the Hall of Fame or some other thing where you take a guy who's played forever like Brind'Amour or Whitney did, who played for a lot of teams like Whitney or Sillinger, these guys who played forever, these lunch pail guys, and in this case they were lunch pail guys who also scored a lot of points, and some kind of a recognition for them post-career. If they're not quite Hall of Famers, fine. You got to have some kind of designation for these guys. And if you want to go with, I guess legends is a little over the top, but something like that, heroes. NHL's heroes. And you induct these guys as heroes. If they become Hall of Famers later, fine. But you could have the NHL come out and do a wonderful PR thing where they induct heroes and they could do 10 a year, and these are the kind of guys you put in. And you say, all right, well, the Hall of Fame committee hasn't put them in yet, But the NHL thinks these guys should be recognized. Because Carolina did it by committee. They had solid goaltending. Their scoring was deep. Their defense was, again, by committee. There wasn't really a dominant defenseman. I'm just looking at it now, and I mean, Caberlet had 44 points. I don't think anybody thinks he's dominant. Brett Hedican, Aaron Ward, Oleg Tverdovsky, Mike Commodore, Andrew Hutchinson, Glenn Wesley. Wesley was towards the end of his career. He wasn't really a top 2 guy anymore. So that's really the question there, isn't it? Should we have something to recognize these guys? This is why I remember at the start of the playoffs, they had the vote on NHL.com, and they talked about it during the playoffs. Vote on who the greatest Stanley Cup champions are of all time. And they showed Carolina, and I can't remember who the other team was. It may have been Anaheim from the year after. And somebody on the panel said, well, I'm not voting for Carolina. And there was a chuckle. This is why I hate to try to grade Stanley Cup champions against each other. This team won the Stanley Cup. They won 2 Game 7s. They busted their asses in a 6-game series against Montreal that they were losing because of Martin Gerber. They switched over to Cam Ward, a rookie, won that series, and then won out the Stanley Cup with a rookie in net and a lot of veteran leadership up front. So is it the Oilers of the 80s? No. Did they win another Stanley Cup? No. Does that mean you could just look at them and go, they were a one-off, who cares? No. Any team that wins the Stanley Cup, that goes through those 4 rounds and wins those 16 games, deserves equal respect to every other team. You can bring up their weaknesses the year before or the year after. You can bring up that maybe their defense wasn't great, maybe their goaltending wasn't great, and it's everybody from a team in the 1920s to a team till now. You can bring up little weaknesses on the team, but when it mattered, they won. They won 16 games, they won the Stanley Cup. I don't diminish any Stanley Cup champion in relation to anybody else, and this is why. Because there's always a story about why a team wins a Stanley Cup. And Carolina's was no less important than anybody else's. So, let me know what you guys think in the comments section below, especially if you're a Canes fan. I don't have the Canes hat on for 2 reasons. One, I wore the Canes hat earlier today with the new Canes jersey I have, which, of course, this is the 3rd jersey. And 2, I can't find it. It's here somewhere. Starting next week, this will all be better organized. So, enjoy the bunker while you can, because things are going to change pretty quickly here. But thank you very much for watching again, and I'll talk to you very soon.